I'd like to introduce Jakob Wahl. He is the Executive Director and Vice President of IAAPA EMEA, which is the Global Association for the Attractions Industry. EMEA stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, with the A in Africa. And Jakob, welcome. Lovely to see your face.
Goedemorgen. Good morning.
Good morning. Jakob's been a good friend and close colleague for us at AAVEA. We've had a couple of conversations with IAAPA during this COVID-19 time to understand what is happening in Europe, to connect with best practices for COVID-19 practices, and of course with Europe opening earlier than us. It's useful for us because we can follow those trends and see what you guys are up to and hopefully learn from that. Jakob knows South Africa well and Cape Town well because you were out here in January for the IAAPA Summit, which feels like another galaxy, not even a lifetime. That was the end of January and was highly successful. So over to you, Jakob. Lovely to see you this morning.
Thank you very much, Sabine. It's wonderful to be with you today. I'm very excited to be part of this, and it's actually wonderful to see you growing so much. This is super professional. I'm very excited also about my co-speakers, and as Sabine pointed out, I will be here for Q&As because I'm actually very curious as well to hear from all the other presentations. So if you have any questions throughout the day, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm happy to assist wherever we can. Sabine said it, today I want to reflect a little bit on the path of how Europe has gone through this crisis and where we currently stand. And it's hard to probably summarize everything, but I want to give you some aspects and some learnings. And I think Sabine mentioned that we have been together in January, and actually the first cases in China, the virus was already ongoing, but I think it was so far away that we all didn't see that coming at that stage. So I want to start with a quote which I actually like a lot from Mr. Schopenhauer, because all truth passes through these three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it is accepted. And I think we are obviously in phase 3, but probably we could have saved a lot of time in phase 1 and 2, seeing what others go through and seeing what China went through. But still, we try to deny it. We try to not accept it. We try to find our own way. To talk about Europe is not that easy because it's a very large geographical space with many countries and actually a very vivid attractions industry. You see some numbers here. We calculate the European attractions industry, approximately 275 million guests in all the attractions. Also, we see a tax contribution of 3.4 billion euros. That is all pre-COVID times, obviously. And we think that none of us knows when we will come back to where we stand or where we stood. So it will be a long path to recovery, but still we are confident that our attractions industry is strong and that we will come back to that. To look back a little bit into the first 6 months this year, and it is also linking to the quote of Mr. Schopenhauer. The first cases arrived in January in Europe, in France and in Germany. Tourism industry was still ongoing. In February, in the UK, the season for many amusement parks started a bit earlier. Bernard will probably talk about it after me. So we saw the first parks opening despite actually coming the first fatalities in our continent. And it hit us strongly in March. And we'll come back to that on the next slide, where we saw everyone closing and really kind of hitting the full wave, and then in April. Already in May, the first recovery started in some of the countries which were probably better managing the crisis. And that continued throughout June, while at the same time, right now, unfortunately, we are facing another wave here in Europe with another spike. So some key dates: March 14th, Efteling closes. March 15th, Disneyland Paris closed. March 20th, Blackpool Pleasure Beach closed. So you see, within 1 week, 3 of the major theme parks in Europe and 3 different countries closed. So that was really kind of the strong moment. All the other countries which were scheduled to open their outdoor attractions within early April for the Easter business obviously stayed closed. But then in the Netherlands, it actually only took 2 months before Efteling could reopen under strict safety protocol. Europa Park also opened May 29th. And England, unfortunately, took a little bit longer on July 4th, same with France, with Disneyland Paris, which obviously also is a big machinery to try to restart the business. So 3 key learnings here. Those parks which were scheduled to open in March and April had a delayed season opening of approximately two months. Those which were open already stayed closed for nearly 3 to 4 months. And then, unfortunately, right now, all those parks which I just mentioned were mainly outdoor attractions. Indoor attractions suffered much more and are still in a critical state in many countries. So we have a very heterogeneous development within Europe, based on diverse factors. Obviously, the first one is the political situation. How is the government accepting the crisis? Do they deny it? Do they do their work? Do they see what is coming? Next one, the health system. Is the health system actually able to cover that? We saw that in Italy, where we had major struggles, which had a longer effect on the whole country, obviously also on the economy, on the industry, and on the attractions industry. Then what is the economic system? How strong is the government? How strong is the state in terms of financials? What can they do to actually support our businesses, to support attractions and trying to recover financially? Also, a huge factor, which is not to neglect, is the mentality of people. Are people actually following the rules? Do they accept masks? Do they see the value in that? And that is a big question where we see also different developments. We have a strong issue right now in Europe with tourists coming from other countries, not following procedures, bringing back the virus to certain countries, and that creates another spike. So that is definitely an issue. And then, what is the strategy? I think we all know, and you as business operators, you will have your own strategy. But what is the strategy of a country? And looking at the big brother over the US, we see that there's one major strategy missing, and that often confuses people and is difficult. And it's also difficult in Europe, because Europe is actually consisting of 27 different member states, which can only create a rough framework where you can set the guidelines for financial support, but it is not that they can actually adapt one rough or one detailed legislation or guidelines for the countries on how to proceed with it, which makes sense, because this is not or even though it's a pandemic, it changes from country to country and often from region to region. And this is why the national governments are in charge of the legal situation, but often in many countries across Europe, in the end, it is the local authorities which need to work on the approach there. And that is what actually we need to do also in terms of associations. And with IAAPA being kind of the global association, or with me representing the EMEA region, it's very hard in here to influence politicians. And this is why it's so important that there are people like Bernard with AAVEA in the UK, and why there are people like you, because you need to work on a national level with your stakeholders to influence where we stand. So what did we do? We did a IAAPA guidance document, which, as I mentioned, we couldn't influence really the opening of particular regions. What we could do was to try to create certain guidelines which can help you and which are universal in a certain way. And this is actually, we are a member association as well, but we provided that for the whole attractions industry. And I will send you, or you will see later, a link. This is for free for everyone in the attractions industry, because we think it's more important than ever to work together in this matter. The key arguments which we used were that parks and attractions are like inner city zones. So you can actually control the access, but you can also distribute your people between different attractions, shops, and restaurants. And I think that is very important, because we know the customer path. You are all experienced operators. You know how people move around in your facilities. So we are actually able, with certain measures, to control that, and maybe, to avoid mass gatherings if things do not work out. Also, we have security on site, and we can control how many people come in, how many people leave. And that is actually very important, and we'll come back to that later. A very important point in that argumentation was also that we said usually we attract families, or we attract groups of friends. So when you come to an attraction, to a museum, to a theme park, you usually go as a family and you stay within this group. This is a huge difference to what we would consider a mass event or festival, where you go, where you meet new people, and where you could spread the virus. So that was very important, that you stay within your group throughout that day. So As I mentioned, this document was only a global guideline. And this is where many national associations developed their own guidance document adapting to the situation in the country. And I think that was very important. And it was wonderful to work with all those associations during this process because there are different needs for different regions and for different attractions. For example, the European Water Park Association obviously went much more into detail with their document. And again, if you want to, we can share that document as a guidance document for the management of swimming pools and water parks. And then we realized that often the realization of the national laws was a regional decision. Especially in those federal countries, we noticed that it was the regional and the local authorities which finally decided on how to turn those procedures into reality and into operation. And this is where it became interesting because you can't expect your local authorities to know about the business and about the operations of a theme park. So they rather looked towards the operators, towards the theme parks and said, well, what is your approach now? What is your protocol? And I think this is where it is key to have actually good relationships with your local authorities because they are in the end the ones you need to work with. And we have this example of a park, or actually two examples of parks here in Europe, which started with a maximum capacity of approximately 30% of the total attendance. And through negotiations, through talks, through visits, and showing those authorities, the health authorities in the park, in the venues, they were able to increase those numbers now, saying, listen, we operated with 15,000 people so far, but you see it is working. We will open more restaurants. We will open more attractions. So now they're allowed to let in 20,000 people. And that's a huge step, and I think it shows again why you should work and why it has been successful here to work so closely with those authorities. There are some best and worst practices, and I don't want to blame anyone because they're wonderful people out there, but we have to be aware, and I think you all know that politicians are not always logical in their approach. And what we have seen is, for example, a horrible example from Sweden, where Sweden had a very liberal actually practice and strategy in handling COVID. They never had a lockdown. They never closed down shops, but they didn't allow amusement parks to open. So we have several key members in Sweden, and they had to stay closed for the whole season, which is a major disaster. And it's interesting, while they run a rather liberal strategy, amusement parks, despite that good relationship and despite that good argumentation, were not allowed to open. And I think you obviously have the case of the alcohol prohibition in South Africa right now. You see, it's another example where not always all steps make sense. Also interesting case in France. There was the intention of opening the parks in end of May, early June, and all of a sudden it got a little bit vague. So what did the French administration, or the French Association for Amusement Parks, which is SNELAC, doing a fantastic job as well, they increased the pressure. So they had their key members talking to media, really raising the bar for politicians, saying how important it is to reopen, how important it is for the local industry, how important it is for the tourism industry. And finally, they succeeded in raising that pressure. Also interesting, and I think that is a case which in probably all of the countries in Europe, correct me if I'm wrong, but zoos were usually the first ones to open. So we looked very closely towards zoos. What did they do? How successful that was? Because they were kind of the test run for amusement parks, theme parks, and everything which came afterwards. So that was important. Key here again is, I think the industry has never been so close with each other during this crisis, because we have never been in this crisis. No one knows exactly what is going to happen. No one has all the answers. So this is where a platform like the association, AAVEA, like this conference is so important, because we can all exchange with each other. We can all learn from each other. We see what works and what doesn't work. To come a little bit further to more examples, and I talked about Sweden, which obviously struggled. We also have different situations in other countries, and I say while Germany, Benelux, and France are actually operating quite okay right now, and I put Spain, Denmark, and UK under yellow, and I hope Bernard agrees with that, because we have different situations here. In Spain is a touristic country, and I know that you are as well. And Spain has been hit very, very hard because where there are no tourists, there are no guests, especially in those touristic areas. And we see many parks reducing their offer again, closing hotels again, because the demand is not there. Denmark is an interesting case as well, because Denmark went actually quite okay through the crisis. But at the same time, you see that local authorities came up with interesting rules. So what they did was a very interesting approach to support attractions or to support museums and zoos. They co-funded 50% of the entrance fees for zoos and museums. So every guest had to pay only 50% of the regular price for a zoo. So that obviously increased the visitation to those attractions massively. But there are two major issues here. This was only valid for museums and zoos. So all the other attractions were all of a sudden perceived to be extremely expensive. So they had a reduced number of visitors. At the same time, it will probably be tough for museums and zoos to come back to the regular pricing next year, having people who are used now to 50% of the price. So also, and we come back to that later, discounting always difficult. United Kingdom, Denmark, another interesting case. They have introduced, and you see there's a lot of discussion about the use of masks. And it's interesting that in Denmark, you are allowed to ride a roller coaster or fast ride with a mask, but you had to throw away after each ride that mask. You were not allowed to use a mask twice on the same ride, on any ride, which is also, you wonder why they come up with that. United Kingdom, and I don't want to take away too much, it still has a very high cap or a very low cap on attendance. But what they did is actually something great, because they lowered the VAT for entrance tickets to attractions. And I think that was actually one of the major benefits for us as an operator, or for British operators, because this is obviously where they could save or earn a lot of more money. What are the learnings since attractions have reopened? And I think that changes every day. So I try to summarize it. We see there's a high demand. Families and friends still want to have a day out. They still want to have this, getting distracted from the daily concerns they have, especially right now throughout COVID. They want to have a great day together, forgetting about the bad sides or bad aspects of 2020. And they quickly forget about the outside world and the rules. So you actually need to have people to remind them of those rules. You need to adapt, because people change. And this is where many parks have hired security to actually alert people about how to handle the situation. And that is very interesting. Many of those attractions who are members of us have actually decided not to use dressed staff in their uniforms as they would be normally in a park, but they have hired security to be very clear that this is, nothing which is, or this is something which comes from the outside world. It is not influenced by the park, but it reflects on what is needed. But also very interesting, guests still want to have a great experience. They focus on the safe experience now. And I have a little screenshot here, and I'm sorry that it's in German, but it shows discussions which are ongoing on Facebook. And I used to work for EAAPA, so I could see that. And it is interesting that in public groups or in closed groups within the internet, people really kind of share their experience. And the first thing they say is, I felt safe, or I didn't feel safe. And it's not, I went to the best coaster, I went to the best attraction, or I had the best show, but they said, I felt safe. And this is where word of mouth right now seems to be more relevant than ever before, and is really key. However, there are two groups within your guests, and that is something which we have noticed, not only through society, but also within the parks. And it's difficult, because they're completely different. You have the cautious one, which are very concerned, which are very behaving, following the rules. And then you have the ignoring one. And that is often difficult to manage that. And this is also why we said, you need actually trained staff and security to try to manage both groups, because the cautious one is getting very annoyed by the ignoring one. And this is where it has been, I think, quite difficult in the past months since reopening to manage those things. The business perspective is actually also something which I think is very important, because operating with limited capacity is tough. And there's nothing to be nice about. It is extremely, extremely difficult for everyone. But there are certain aspects, and I'm a desperate optimist, which are important to think about. Many parks have introduced reservation-only systems, which can obviously, which help you manage the attendance, but also they control the expenses. And I know of many facilities, many members in the past, they have done their staffing plans based on the weather forecast. Right now, we switch to a system where actually the staffing is based on reservations. And I think that is very interesting. And I know certain members who want to stick to that even after the virus is hopefully gone, because they say, listen, it makes my life so much easier to control my human resources, my labor costs, even in those difficult times. Also, for the outdoor attractions, it is a safe income, even if it rains all of a sudden. And that is, I think, also a very important point. We have seen in many facilities across Europe a higher per cap spending. And I think that has actually two reasons. What I call the holiday effect and the past expense. The holiday effect is quite simple. The family right now, the German classic tourist family is not going to Spain because of travel restrictions, because of certain risks. So they say, I stay at home. Instead, they might go 1 or 2 days to a theme park and they say, listen, I want this to be my holiday now. So they're willing to spend more to make it really a great experience and an unforgettable day out. The second thing is the past expense. With the pre-booked tickets, which are bought online, this expense of buying the ticket is faded out in memory, because it has happened maybe 2 days ago or 1 week ago. So they don't see that going out of their pocket or out of their wallet on that day. So in the end, they feel they can spend more. And I think that's obviously a great sign. Two things which we will, I think, see in the future is the annual passes are strongly discussed right now because with limited capacity, you can't, allow season passes to come in as they have been. And the other thing is pricing strategy, where I will also mention it briefly later. But I think right now, it is a very interesting moment to discuss pricing in general. Because what's next? And there are some ups and downs. And I think what we have noticed is that regional parks seem to get better through the crisis than others. Destinations suffer. And I think, the big tourist cities in Europe, Barcelona, Venice, London, they're ghost towns right now in a certain way. Attractions which were struggling prior to COVID are really suffering right now. That is also what we see, that if the business model was not 100% clear, it has become more difficult right now. But also there's some hope in the industry, and I think what we have seen is that the index of most parks is now between 60 and 80 to last year. We actually have had several members which reported the best July they ever had, which is hopeful. Obviously, groups, schools are missing, but still you see there is a strong demand of people to have a day out. What we also noticed from what we heard from our members, that family entertainment centers, indoor attractions, took usually 4 weeks to get to an index of 60 after reopening. I also want to tell you about one thing which I think was very, very interesting, and it's public, so I can share that. Yesterday, Europa Park in Germany actually reported the first visitor with COVID-19. So what happened? They were informed by the health authorities, and I think yesterday morning, that 9 days ago, someone who now has COVID was visitor of the park on that day. So the local authorities actually requested the park to write to all of their guests on that day, which again is now possible due to the pre-booking system. So they have all those email addresses informing them about the fact that on that day, that person was in the park, had lunch at that time, really kind of tracking down where that person was, and saying, please, you can go to work, you can be with friends, but look for yourself, look for symptoms, and be cautious. And I think it is very interesting to look at the media echo, because the media was very positive about it. And while the media is observing very closely how people behave in parks and attractions, and you have seen many reports saying, listen, this or that park, doesn't follow the rules, they were appreciative in that case that the park reached out to the guests and said, listen, that happened, and was very transparent. And I think transparency is always very important in that matter of fact. So what's next? And I think I'm not a fortune teller. I can't tell you because the situation evolves daily, and we have every day a new situation. We learn something every day. So I can only advise to stay flexible, stay connected, and try to prepare for everything. And I think, you have here a wonderful platform, which you hopefully use. And I invite you again, use us as a platform as well, because I think we are better in this together. And I think that is the key point. A very important question, and I think we don't have the answer yet. Will we limit attendance in the future and offer a more exclusive experience? With those parks which had to reduce the capacity of their parks, they say, listen, people have a great experience that day and they're very satisfied. They're much more satisfied than before. So maybe we have to change our perspective for not always going bigger and more and, record numbers, but where we limit ourselves to a smaller number, but offering a great experience. And then the question is, what do we do with pricing? Do we become more exclusive? Do we maybe, and I think that will be a big trend, to introduce more yield management, more dynamic pricing, because if everyone books online, we can obviously adjust the pricing, we can work with that, and we can really cater to those people and to those weekdays which we had in the past, and try to balance that out better. And having a reduced attendance over all days instead of peaks and lows. And why shouldn't it work? What works for the airline industry, for the hotel industry? Why shouldn't it work also for us? So I think that is again some of the things which we will see in the years or in the months to come. But then again, I think we are all in this together. We are all in this together for the first time. No one has the answers, and I'm trying to get smarter every day, and I hope you too. And I look forward to share those thoughts with you and to hopefully get through this again. And Sabine mentioned it. We had an amazing stay in South Africa, and it feels like a different century. But it was wonderful to see all of you kind of managing your wonderful attractions, to be dynamic, to be passionate about it. And I'm sure exactly with that passion, we will also get through this and hopefully be in a better 2021 again. I want to finish with 2 resources which we want to share for you, or which we want to share with you again for free. Please go to our website, look at it. It might not have all the answers for South Africa, but again, it should give you some inspiration, some ideas. And I think that is the right thing to do at this moment. So thank you very much for having me again. It was a pleasure to be with you. I wish I could see all of you, but I'm confident we will do that in the future. And stay safe, stay healthy. And again, if you have any questions today in the next days, you have my contact details. I'm looking forward to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. Wow, that was so interesting.
Yeah.
And we're kind of lucky that you guys are going ahead through this ahead of us, so we can learn from you. Interesting, you've also touched on a number of topics we're going to bring up later, which is pricing, the experience economy, etc. Just a quick note, the IAAPA guidelines, along with the Tourism Business Council guidelines for opening, are on our AAVEA website as well. But really, Jakob, I found that very fascinating and very interesting to see how this experience and pricing leverage point is going to play out in the next year. Very, very interesting. I think I'm going to adopt the Desperate Optimist as my Twitter handle, because I'm an optimist, but I've been struggling how to define, how did you, Desperate Optimist, fantastic.
I love it.
I think we all are. We are attractions operators after all, right? And I think, as an operator, you're always optimistic, and, we need to fix things. And the situation is as it is, and we just need to live with it.
And the world needs more optimism and more hope. So I'm all for that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Cool. So before we move on to Bernard, we've got quite a few questions that have come through. Thank you very much. But we have one quick question that we have time for. Government and authority support seems to be problematic around the world. How did our attractions overcome some of the hurdles and lack of direction?
Ooh, that's probably a question for rather attractions than for us. I think what we have seen is that political contacts are very important in that. And I mentioned that before, the stakeholders. We have seen through actually pressure of operators, and I quoted the example in France, where it was about the reopening, but also where we have seen pressure from stronger operators on politicians, on the local politicians, actually support them with also funding during this time. And there are certain measures in different countries where you can furlough people, and the government is paying for that. And some of those did not apply to actually all our members and to all our facilities, or to all also supplier members. So in that matter of fact, we tried, and the national associations tried, to make those politicians aware of the struggles which we had. And I think that's key. I think, the reduced VAT in Germany and in the UK is a wonderful example on how you can actually introduce, as a politician, a measure to help your businesses, because that is, really kind of money which stays with you. And I sincerely hope that, it brings in the effect which was desired, especially in the UK and in Germany.
Well, interesting. So we still feel like we're in the middle of winter. It's a very cold day today, and we're heading towards our spring and summer season. We're lucky that we're allowed to, leisure activities are now open as of Tuesday.
Yes.
And I had my first drink in a restaurant yesterday. It was very nice. But I will definitely go through your slides again, because there was a lot of food for thought. And just as a heads up for everybody, that all the speakers, all the talks will be available on this app for 6 months afterwards. So that's part of your delegate registration. You'll be able to get hold of everything. So thank you, Jakob. Much appreciated. We'll be in touch, as we always are.